Uè bella gente, questo episodio è in inglese, so switch language. And we are back online from New York City. Hi everyone, how's it going? This is Giacomo Baldelli, and this is my podcast, Chiamo Dopo. Welcome to it. How are you guys doing? It's been a while, right? It's crazy. I think it was like a couple of months ago, the last time we dropped an episode in English. And so, it's good to be back. It's good to be back, and I'm super excited for the guest that we have on the show today. Before introducing this guest to you guys, though, I just want to say this. As I said, we drop from time to time an episode in English. There's no regular schedule. So, in order to be up to date with this kind of episodes, if you are an English speaker and you're kind of like into these conversations that we have with these great guests, so don't go away at the end of this episode. Go back to the main page of Chiamo Dopo on the platform where you normally listen podcasts from, I don't know, Spreaker, Spotify, Apple Podcast, and follow our show on that platform. This way, every time we drop a new episode in English, you will be up to date. You will have, I don't know, like a notification or whatever. So you won't miss it, okay? You won't miss the new episode in English. I just want to say that I'm super excited for today's guests. And it's great because you guys that probably started to follow our show like a couple of months ago, 3-4 months ago, when we started to, publish these episodes in English, you probably don't know, but the beginning of this show back in 2019 was mostly focused on musicians, okay? I am a new music performer myself, so I started to talk to a lot of musicians, composers, and performers of this specific kind of music. We haven't had the chance to have a guest that is like important, okay, for this kind of music yet in our episodes in English, and so this is the first time, okay, and I'm truly honored to, let's say, inaugurate this series of episodes with one of my favorite composers. I'm just glad to have her on my show, and her name is Beglarian. How can I explain how important she is to me? Maybe I can do this. Since 2018, every time I perform a show, I start my show with a piece that she wrote. It's called Until It Blazes, and I actually recorded this piece for like an old album called Electric Creatures back in 2018, and it's truly one of my favorite works, and it's always a pleasure to perform it, and I find it extremely deep and meditative. And we actually have the chance to talk about that piece together, and I don't know, I just think she's a great musician, a wonderful composer, but most of all, she's an amazing person. And so it's a great honor to have her today on this show, so just like relax and enjoy this conversation. This is me talking to Beglarian.
Talk to you later.
I moved to New York in 2014, right? From
Right.
Italy. And, I started to try to understand the city. I'm not 100% sure that I've understood it, at this point right now, even
right.
now. And, I was talking to Laura, my wife, and I was like, there are like a few composers, people that I would like to meet because I love their music. And, and there's this composer that I've never heard about before, Beglarian. And Laura is like, yeah, you should try to find a way of meeting her. And then, life happened, things happened, and you were still on the top of my priority list of people to meet, So it was late 2016, early 2017, Women's March.
Oh my God.
Okay, so I was talking to Laura, and we were like marching, with like democracy and whatever, with like all we created our like banners and we were marching, and so we passed like two women, and Laura said hi to one of the two, and that was you. And we kept walking, right? And I told Laura, but like that woman kind of looked like, because in the meantime, I've seen pictures of you, and like photos, like she truly looks like Eve Beglarian. And Laura is like, oh yeah, that was Eve Beglarian. I'm like, thank you. And so I ran back, with like all this crowd, like walking in the opposite direction, just to say hi.
Oh my God.
And that was like the first time that we met. I mean, that was crazy. And I came back home and I was like, I wanted to meet this person, but right now, considering that I met her in that specific, occasion, I want to meet her even more.
That is so perfect. I love it totally.
Yeah.
Talk to you later.
Where are you now? Let's start from this. Where are you located?
Well, right now I'm in New York City, but I've been splitting my time between Vermont and New York City. Since, I had a place in Vermont before the pandemic.
Okay.
But of course, during the pandemic, I spent more time in Vermont.
Okay.
Yeah.
But like, do you find like being up there a little bit more, I don't know, is that a better environment for you in terms of like being creative? Or do you need the triggers of a city like New York with things and like, I don't know, meeting people, concerts, I don't know.
Yeah, I think for me, having a balance of both is what I've realized. Like, it's a funny thing because for a while I was like, I should choose one, there's some sets like I should be monogamous, and then I realized, no, I don't have to be monogamous. Like, it's not allowed, I mean, it's not required. And, and, and to really be able to go back and forth between having a house and having land and being able to be outdoors and in nature and have all of that. And then also have, all of the pleasures of New York City and concerts and theater and friends. I mean, I certainly know a lot more people in New York than I do in Vermont.
Of course.
And so it really is a pleasure to be able to have both. And I feel really lucky.
Yeah.
That
I was asking this question because when I think about you and I think about your work, right, there's a big portion of, I don't know, inspiration, I guess, that comes from nature. And so for some reason I thought that, that could have been like a sort of happy place up there in terms of like being creative and productive with music,
Yeah. And I built a little composing cabin on my land, and it's like a 10 by 12 little room with a view of the mountains. And it's like idyllic, and it's the perfect thing because you're out there and you're engaged, with nature in some much really deep way, actually. And that's thrilling.
Of course.
But to be out there all the time, I think I would lose a lot,
Yeah.
Talk to you later.
I would really like, if it's okay for you, to try to go through a little bit of your, life, your career, and to see what kind of like brought you to be at the point where you are right now. And so can I ask you, how did you what was your encounter with music? I kind of know a little bit the answer because I studied a little bit about you, but it would be nice for you to share a little bit like how you, I don't know, decided to be a musician in life.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in a musical family, and my father was trained as a composer, and my mother was a pianist and a harpsichordist and an organist. And so I was surrounded by music growing up, and it felt totally like I learned to read music at the same time I learned to read words. And playing the piano and singing and that kind of thing was just sort of part of the household. It was just normal. And then when I was in high school, my father became the dean of the School of Performing Arts at the University of Southern California.
Okay.
And we moved to Los Angeles.
Ooh.
And that really intensified, actually, the sort of musical world that I was exposed to, because, they would have parties and faculty would come over and play ping pong. And, so we were living in this situation sort of surrounded by musicians and composers and all of that. And it was a really interesting time actually in Los Angeles, because there were many, many people who had come to the US in the wake of the Second World War.
Yeah.
And so they were the classical music establishment, if you will, in Los Angeles in that era. And so partially because of Hollywood, but also not, like it was really interesting, because it's not what we think of in terms of Los Angeles, but that's definitely threaded in the DNA of how that city developed. And the new music scene that we see in Los Angeles now is partially something that was seeded by that time,
back then.
And it's really interesting sociologically to think about. I was surrounded by music, but it didn't occur to me, like I was interested in a lot of different things. And I went to college thinking I would do science, brain science in particular.
Okay.
But by like October of my freshman year, I realized, oh, no, this is a terrible mistake. Like I just took for granted being surrounded by music all the time. And it's not going to work for me to give that up. And so I switched, sort of, it took a little while because I was in my, I had already signed up for my courses and stuff. So it really started seriously in my sophomore year that I sort of made a right turn and went back into music. But I didn't know what I wanted to do in music exactly.
Okay.
Yeah,
sure.
Part of, because there was this, at least in the classical music part of my upbringing, it was very, like, you're gonna practice in a practice room 10 hours a day and
of course.
become a virtuoso, and and I was like not going to do that. I knew I had no interest in doing that. I thought about conducting as maybe something that would be something I could do, or maybe being a record producer or something. And then I started writing music as a way to be a better conductor.
Okay. Sure.
But I fell in love with composing. I just totally loved it. From the moment I started writing music, it was like, oh, this is great. In a way, it started at the very beginning of my life. And in another way, I was a sort of a late bloomer because I hadn't considered myself as being somebody who was going to do music as an adult. It definitely was something I chose rather than something that was imposed on me. But I also realized I had the tremendous benefit of growing up, sort of by osmosis.
Sure.
Knowing a lot of repertoire, having a lot of experience of listening to music, of hearing performances, of going to concerts, of all of that, as much as, having taken piano lessons and cello lessons.
Talk to you later.
This happened in Los Angeles, and for some reason I thought that you were like a born and raised New Yorker.
No.
Okay.
No. I mean, we lived in New Jersey when I was, when I was little. So I was born in Ann Arbor, and then
Oh yeah, sure.
Lived in New Jersey until I was 10.
Okay.
And then we moved to Los Angeles.
Okay.
And I lived in Los Angeles until I was 18 and went to college.
Okay.
And I came back to New Jersey and went to Princeton as an undergrad.
Oh, okay.
Um,
Okay. Okay.
so
Okay.
that's how,
Uh,
yeah. And
mhm.
then moved to New York. Then went to Columbia for grad school
Mhm.
and have been in New York ever since. So it's reasonable for you to imagine me as
Yeah, I mean,
a
it
born and
might
bred
be
New
also
Yorker.
like related, sometimes I'm, when people ask me about New York, right, living in New York and things like that, I always quote you because you said one thing to me one day that really resonated. I mean, at first it was like difficult to understand when you told me something like, because New York City is regional, is a
Ah,
regional city. And I was like, what are you talking about? I mean, this is like the biggest town, in the Western. But then like going on and living in New York, I truly understood what you meant. Like in terms of like, of course, music and arts and whatever, that you know, we are like very, very connected to the place where we live or where we work or where we study. And it's always harder and harder to go somewhere else in the city to, I don't know, go to a concert or like, if you live in
yeah.
Queens or like you live on the Upper West Side, going to a concert in Brooklyn, it's a lot of effort, and so
Hmm.
sometimes people that are up there, they stay up there. People in Brooklyn, they stay in Brooklyn. It's this kind of like weird thing,
Yeah.
and so probably that's why it was because of these chats that we had in the past that I, for some reason, like connected you to New York City only,
Yeah.
but
Well,
it's.
it is. Yeah. I think the word I used was provincial,
Yeah,
right?
sorry, you're
Yeah.
right. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That which is
No,
regional
no, no,
means
no.
something completely
Yeah.
different. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
Of
But
course.
it
Yeah.
it's because it's such a huge community that you can afford to be provincial. I mean,
Yeah.
you can just hang out on the Upper West Side,
Exactly.
and there's a
Yeah,
whole,
exactly.
rich array of
Yeah.
things to do.
Yeah, exactly.
And you can just hang out in Brooklyn, and there's a whole other rich array of things to do. And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah. Of course.
yeah.
Talk to you later.
There's one thing that I just read about and we actually never talked about, and it's when I read it, I was like, "Whoa, this is intense." It's something that happened to you in 2009 when you basically followed the course of the Mississippi River entirely.
Yes. Yes.
But like, what was the inspiration, the trigger of doing such a big journey, and why?
Yeah. Yeah. 2008 was, of course, the economic crash
Hmm.
in New York, in the country in general, but in New York, it was sort of particularly salient because of all the financial stuff that's based here.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was the combination of that and the election of Obama,
Mm-hmm.
which had happened that year also.
Of course.
Um, and in a way, a delayed reaction to the horror of Hurricane Katrina
Mm-hmm.
and what that showed us about the way we treat Black people in this country
Mm-hmm.
specifically. It was some combination of those three things that made me think I should do like a one-person WPA journey,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
In the Depression, the federal government in the United States gave money to artists to go out into the countryside and sort of document
Hmm.
um, what was going on in the countryside. And I knew that the federal government wasn't going to pay me to kayak and bicycle down the
Yeah.
Mississippi River,
Yeah.
but I thought it was a really useful thing to do in a moment of crisis and
Yeah.
reorganization of the country. But it was also, there was a time, I mean, it's hard to remember back to 2009,
Yeah.
and the sense of a possibility
Yeah.
that Obama's election had had engendered for all of us, was the sense that, we're going to get our country back from, and so, and I also felt like, I'd been in New York in my provincial New York bubble for a long time, for my entire adult life. And I thought, it would be really useful to sort of leave this place for a year and get some perspective on what the rest of the country is about. And the Mississippi is, in a way, the spine of the country. It's the water that flows into that river is about 2/3 of the entire country. It all the way out, in Missouri, a drop of water, will end up 2 weeks later flowing past New Orleans into the Gulf of Mexico. And so if you're wanting to sort of understand the country in some way, you could make worse choices than to start in Minnesota and head south along the Mississippi River all the way to the Gulf.
But that project, like, were you able to? So you did it in order to know? It was like a personal journey, or was there like, I'm gonna collect sounds, I'm gonna meet people, I'm gonna meet like artists of the parts of the country that I'm gonna encounter, or was it just like something that was yours? It was like personal. There was no like creative thing behind it.
Well, no, I mean, definitely, because I write music, because I make music, I knew that's in some form or another, the outcome of the journey would be musicalized, but I didn't have a precise agenda.
There was there was no agenda.
And I'm not, and because I'm not a musicologist, I'm not an ethnomusicologist. Like that's not really my field. I didn't feel like becoming an amateur ethnographer was going to be the most interesting way for me to, like there are people who would be wonderful at that. But it didn't seem to me that was going to be something I was just going to wake up doing, one day, the next day, So it felt more like, for lack of a better word, a quest, a sense of a journey that I needed to take in the middle of my life, nel mezzo del, except it wasn't to hell, although there were dark parts of it.
Really?
Sure.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I couldn't imagine like how. I mean, that was like, how long was that trip?
I spent about 4.5 months going down the river, and then I had set up a network of artist colonies so that I would spend a year away from New York.
I mean, and this was 2009 and into 2010. Okay.
Yes.
Wow, that was amazing. That was I mean, it's unbelievable. More than amazing, it's unbelievable almost. And so, wow.
Well, and it did generate. I mean, it generated projects. I mean, in a way, I premiered a project this January. So we're talking 13 years later.
Okay.
That was initiated when I went down the river in 2009.
Wow.
And I'm considering yet another project that I made that will require more journeying.
Okay.
Into the upper Midwest.
Okay.
That would be tracing stories that I learned about, again, in 2009.
Wow.
But it's a journey that a European explorer took, or a European American explorer took, and he became very interested in the Ojibwe, the indigenous people in the upper Midwest.
Okay.
Married an Ojibwe woman, and she was a poet. And, so there's like lots of interesting and disturbing, it's about how settler culture impacted the culture that was there already. Yeah. And so in a sense, that if I do that project going forward, which I'm not 100% sure I'm going to do, but it would be yet another project that grew out of that 2009 journey.
Talk to you later.
So the legacy of that project, it's like still stands nowadays, like to this day, somehow.
Yeah. And it's not over.
It's not over. Yeah. And one thing that even like trying to find like traits of your work and your personality into your work, just by listening to you telling this story, brings up the theme that I find in a lot of your work, where when you create music, when you create something about music, it's not just about music itself. That there's a deeper meaning into it. You said that you didn't go to this trip because you wanted to do it, but that was the reflection of something that was happening in the country. And this project that you might or might not do, and the upper Midwest, we know, what's the I don't want to say issue, but yeah, the issue, of from a historical, American historical point of view, so there's this strong connection by you feeling the need of expressing yourself with music connected to these big themes that are related to American culture, American society, and American history, right?
Yeah, I think that's a very true thing to say. Yes, and in a sense, I think of myself as, because music is the language I have. It's the language that's most developed in me, right?
Yeah.
I'm
Sure.
a better composer than I am a writer, for example, or painter or
Sure.
any other art form. And so I get interested in, some corner of the world, and I want to make something, I want to communicate something about that. And so because music is my language, that's what I do, is make music in response to these ideas or these issues or these stories or whatever. And if I were a writer, I would write instead,
Sure.
But yes, the idea of, sitting down and, I don't know, writing a woodwind quintet because we need another woodwind quintet in the world. It's just, I don't get that.
Well, I don't want to. I don't think we need another one. I mean, there are people who might probably appreciate, but like, I know what you're saying. Of course, I'm joking. Exactly, but it's true, and this is like also this kind of like old idea. I think old. I don't know if it's old. It should be current, but like somehow I just think it's this old idea of, artists and creative people that should be the witness, of society, reality, of history, right? So they should be the ones that are able to express, what's going on, somewhere in the world better than others. That should be like the role, right? And I find in your work a lot of that, and probably this is why I love your work, and I say it because I'm saying it to you right now because I say it to everybody. So I have no problem.
Talk to you later.
During the pandemic, for us, musicians and artists, life has been particularly hard First of all, there've been problems that were bigger and more serious than ours somehow. All of this being said, for us that, we built our life in terms of relationships, meeting people, performing in front of an audience, this thing has been taken away from us for obvious reasons. So it's not been the best. And I've had a pretty rough time where I actually at some point considered, like, why am I doing this still? And, I've been periodically I question my being a musician role. It's like, it's a cycle. Sometimes it comes back, and of course in 2020, 2021, I was pushed there somehow,
Sure.
And when these things happen, I always have this need to go back to the deep reasons why I am a musician. It's because fundamentally I love music more than loving guitar, which is my instrument, more than loving to be on a stage, this kind of stuff. And as a performer, I go back, I have my safe works, like those things that when I play those pieces, I end up saying, this is why I do what I do. Because I want to play these things. And one of them is Until It Blazes, which, as a new music performer, that we always struggle to be the first ones to perform that piece, and sometimes we are proud because we've been the first ones, to discover. I haven't been the first one, and there were already plenty of people performing that piece before. So I have no, my contribution to the cause was not that much. I came afterwards, but still.
Although I love your recording.
Oh,
I love
you.
your recording. I really, really do.
Thank you so much.
So,
but anyways, this is it's a piece that, now it's part of me somehow. It's this kind of stuff where when you perform it, for some reason you get into a zone where you don't think anymore. It's and I rarely found this in other works that I've been playing. It's a sort of really meditative state of mind. And I don't know if you ever thought, first of all, that this piece would have become so popular within the guitar community, because in the end it was not written for guitar, right?
No, I mean, originally it was written for keyboard originally, and definitely it got taken up by guitarists, and which is correct. It is a guitar piece,
right,
and should be a guitar piece. Although I do love it also on percussion instruments, like
exactly.
vibraphone.
That
also is really effective, and there are some recordings out there that I'm really fond of as well.
I mean, I just wanted to share this. I mean,
that's such a kind thing. Such a kind thing. Yeah. I mean, the funny thing is with pieces, I mean, this is sort of a side thing to say, but I've written a whole bunch of pieces, and there are certain ones that sort of land in the moment in a way that, they end up getting performed so much more than the others, right? And you don't know that when you write the piece. It's not like I wrote Until It Blazes and thought, hundreds of guitar players.
Yeah, this is going to work, man. This is going to be it.
You sort of, you make the piece and I'm fascinated by because in a way I think there is a way that the pieces of mine, at least, that are getting performed the most tend to be ones where the emotion or the ideas have been distilled. So there's a clarity and
Mm-hmm.
for lack of a better word, purity,
Mm-hmm.
although it worries me to use that word, to the idea. There's a simplicity to it in a
Exactly.
certain way.
Sure.
And of course, it takes time to be able to simplify your ideas to that point. I mean, it's not something that happens
Of
instantaneously.
course.
You
Mm-hmm.
sort of have to be complex in order to simplify,
Sure.
or to simplify in the ways that are gonna contain multitudes,
Yeah.
And so it's really interesting to think about,
Yeah.
To me, I find it really, really surprising and sort of joyful
Yeah.
to find out which ones are going to land in that way.
Talk to you later.
I approached that work because I was about to record an album, right? And I wanted it to be part of it, and that's exactly what I was looking for that recording project, right? I've spent my life working with composers, and being a guitarist, and then mostly now like electric guitarist, right? Where you even like meet composers and you show all your effects, that it seems
Right.
like showing your toys to people, like, look at this, there's a blinking light here, and I found how easy is for a lot of people to get distracted by this kind of stuff. So to write dependent on the possibilities of like a multi-pedal digital effect, and I love that work because that was exactly what I always was trying to say. Like, guys, the key for me is to be the one who is going to perform a clear music idea. And sometimes the musical idea for me has to be the priority. Then we can talk about effects in order to make it nicer,
Right.
or like, I don't know, more effective. I'm sorry.
Or communicate.
Oh,
more.
communicate.
Yeah.
And so just like looking at the score, looking at how essential somehow, and in the most in the most positive kind of way of saying essential is the score of Until It Blazes. That's what captured me. You can build so much from that, and it was amazing. It was truly amazing.
I'm so glad.
Talk to you later.
You've always been like a composer that it's always been open also, though, to meet other forms of art, like, visual arts, words, and dance too, right? So is it something that you discovered like little by little in your life, or you started from the beginning to, I don't know, work with artists that were coming from different areas?
It's hard for me to know because, in a sense, I think because I was never a pure composer in the sense of what we were talking about earlier, of like, purely thinking in musical terms without reference to other ways of, because I've always sort of been more fluid that way in how the ideas get embedded in the music and how the musical ideas are embedded in other kinds of ideas. I think it was really natural for me to work first, I think, in dance.
Okay.
Yeah, that's how it happened in my biography, if you will, is that first I was collaborating, choreographers started using my music for dance.
Okay.
And then I started working in theater, which was really, and also I had worked, my day job for a while when I was younger was producing audiobooks.
Oh,
And so
okay.
I was directing actors and working with actors.
Uh-huh.
And so I got very comfortable with the idea of the way music and theater and theatrical ideas work together and
Huh.
how that happens. And
Hmm.
so I did a lot of collaborations in theater, and then setting words, to music, writing songs. That felt, but that wasn't the first. It sort of started from dance and went into theater, and then I sort of got more interested in writing songs,
Hmm.
and then working with video, film. That's fine. It was more about, I think, in a funny way, it wasn't so much that I sought it out
Hmm.
as that people heard my music and felt like, oh, this would work in these different domains.
Okay.
And
Okay. Uh-huh.
if that makes sense.
Yeah, sure,
And
sure, sure, absolutely.
yeah, and
Mm-hmm.
so it felt very organic to me,
Hmm.
and again, yeah, I think it grows out of that same thing of it being as much about what I'm doing is as much about storytelling
Sure.
as it is about abstract music. It's
Sure.
not abstract music,
Exactly.
you know.
Exactly.
Talk to you later.
Could be also like a natural, as you said, like fluid, organic thing of discovering other outcomes, for your music. And it could be like, it could also be like periods of time, of your life where you're like more like focusing,
Yes.
on something and some sort of collaboration that can also change. I mean, I'm not a super fan of people who do not develop, I mean, who just like stay, this is what I do, and that's
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And so I don't find it in your work. I mean, absolutely not. So it's
Well, I'll tell a story of the piece I'm working on right now.
sure.
I'm writing a piano piece for the pianist Thomas Feng, who is
Mhm.
an awesome pianist,
Okay.
and he's quite interested in the music of Milton Babbitt, and
Okay.
almost, in fact, did his dissertation on Milton Babbitt.
Okay.
And Milton was my teacher,
Oh,
or
okay.
one of my teachers.
Mhm.
And so, even though musically we are quite distant from one another, Milton and I was extremely fond of him, and he actually wrote a piece for, I got married when I was very young, and
Okay.
he wrote a piece for my wedding.
Okay.
And this piece had been sort of in a box somewhere,
Hmm.
and I found it relatively recently, and somebody recorded it. And anyway, long story, too long.
No, okay.
But I wanted to write a piano piece for Thomas. And the idea was to do something related to Emily Dickinson, because during COVID, during
Uh-huh.
lockdown,
Uh-huh.
I had decided that Emily Dickinson is the perfect role model for
Mhm.
being in isolation in a rural New England town, because
Mhm.
after all, she spent her life very effectively
Mhm.
being in lockdown, her
Mm.
whole life basically
Mm.
in a New England town, and it worked out well for her. She was very fond of this flower that gets called ghost pipe. It's a flower that's actually sort of albino. It
Mhm.
has no color because it doesn't need chlorophyll, because it steals its nutrients from the surrounding greenery. And it's actually not a normal flower, it's a parasite. It's not even a fungus, it's a parasite.
Yeah.
And it lives by stealing from the things around it. So when it came time, and she called these flowers, she described them as unearthly booty,
Mm.
which is just like such a beautiful phrase. And so I decided that the title of the piece for Thomas should be Unearthly Booty, and that what I would do is steal from this solo cello piece that Milton wrote for my wedding 400 years ago. And
Okay.
so I spent like a month,
Mm.
12 counting this piece and figuring out how he made the piece and how he
Mm.
built the piece.
Mm.
because I had to relearn 12-tone theory because, of course, I haven't thought about it in 40 years.
Yeah.
And then it happened that some friends of mine, choreographer based in Paris, is making a dance about mesocordial networks and how plants communicate and all of that kind of stuff. And she was like, "Do you have a piece that would work for this?" And I said, "Well, maybe the new piano piece would be the perfect thing."
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And so, but the reason I'm telling you this story is because I had all those ideas about writing the piano piece for Thomas, right? But I hadn't figured out how the piece should go, right? I knew that it should steal from Milton, but I had no formal ideas for how the piece should be structured. So I said to the choreographer, if you are building a structure for the dance and you know what you want the shape of the piece to be, why don't you write that up as an outline, and then I'll see if I can use that formal structure to build the piece.
So the even in something that it was like your idea, you know, and it was a solo piece for a pianist, this sense of collaboration, even if it was not intentional, came up somehow, and you decided that it could have been like a benefit to your project.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And so she sent me the outline, and I hadn't started working on the piece, right?
Yeah.
Or I had done the initial analysis of the Milton Babbitt, so I knew what my materials were, but I hadn't actually started building the piece. And so, and in a way, when she first sent it to me, I thought, this is insane. Like, now I've given myself an assignment to, to like respond to her desires for how the piece should go. And that's like crazy. But of course, it's turned out to be really fruitful. And I'm really happy with how the piece is going, because there's this, additional engine. It's not just playing out some algorithm about how the piece should go.
Talk to you later.
You're defining yourself as a storyteller, right? And you told me that, a lot of your work, and even in the beginning, you didn't like the idea of like being in a room for 10 hours to perform, like to practice cello or whatever, or piano, know?
Yeah.
And, probably this thing of you having, I don't want to say the need, but like to, again, benefit from inspirations that are coming from somewhere or someone else. Probably it's part of who you are, instead of like sitting at a piano and say, okay, I need to write this thing alone, in complete isolation. I'm gonna find in my memories, or I don't know, so like the fact that the inspiration comes from the outside, and it's inevitable, it's inevitable, I believe. Being like a human being, supposed to be social, supposed to be a social animal,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So this is like the now, right? Your work that you're focusing, these days.
Right. I mean, this week, I hope to finish a piece in the next week or two. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do we have like other things on the horizon that you can talk about or not?
Yeah. I mean, the things I know for sure that are coming up, I'm writing another big piano piece, this one for a pianist named Don Berman, who is commissioning composers to write additional movements for Ives's Concord Sonata.
Wow. That's
cool. It's really cool.
Really cool.
And so the one he commissioned for me is based on Emily Dickinson. And it gets paired with the one that Ives wrote for Emerson. So the big crunchy first movement of the Concord Sonata. And so I'm doing all this reading and research and listening, actually. I mean, I sort of did a deep dive into Charles Ives on a deeper level than he was one of my favorite composers when I was a teenager. So I've certainly lived with his work, but to revisit it now in adulthood has been really rich. And it turns out he was a neighbor. He lived like half a block from where I live in New York.
That's crazy.
So that's super cool.
The beauty of New York City, you know.
Yep.
I mean, you find yourself like hanging out in a place and you're like, oh my God, this is where I don't know who was like living or like having a coffee every day. You know, it's awesome. It's awesome.
Yeah. It's totally cool.
All right, this was me talking to Eve Beglarian. So best of luck, Eve, for all your future projects. I'm super excited to like hear new music written by you. And again, it was a great honor and pleasure to have you as a guest on this show. So you guys, the show is over. The episode is over. Probably the next episode will be back in Italian. So, you know, you won't hear from us for a little bit. But we will be back with another great guest for another English episode. So, you know, stay tuned.